work, partly because of my experience with this guy right here that we're going to talk about today. So who am I? Well, my name is Michael. I'm a logaholic. I'm a blue team defender, malware archaeologist, and logaholic, of course. I love properly configured logs. Logs are awesome. I was at SplunkConf this last week teaching people how to do, who was there? Who said woo? There's somebody else in SplunkConf here? And I love the logs because they tell us who, what, where, when, and hopefully how malware or the behavior of malwarian occurred, what happened, what they do. I'm the creator of the Windows logging cheat sheet. It's a great reference. If you want to know how to configure Windows logs so they actually tell you something, please go out and check that out. It's on everything I talk about here is on malware archaeology, except for the bottom one. I also am going to be releasing a Windows PowerShell logging cheat sheet, and just released the Windows Splunk logging cheat sheet for you Splunk folks. You can interpolate that for other logging solutions if you want. And also the creator of the malware management framework. So malware management, think vulnerability management. I read reports, I take the artifacts out of that, and I apply it to my security solutions, or that's where I look for things. I'm also the co-creator of LogMD, the log malicious discovery tool with Mr. Betcher right here, who I'm lighting up. Raise your hand. Stand up. There you go. So we'll be covering that here in a second. Brian is with the other Brian on Breaking Down Security podcast. So the goal is interaction. Don't be a ding-dong, because you'll get rewarded if you ask questions. Short questions, of course. I don't want to slow this down too much, but there is some wiggle room in here. So by all means, please, Brian or myself will throw you a ding-dong if you ask a good clarifying question. And again, this is designed for us ninjas to teach those ninjas out there, all of you, how we found this. And of course, we're also going to talk about a new tool for you to use. We are announcing the release of a tool today. It's free for your use that can help out on this. So why listen to me? About May 2012, the company I worked for at the time got hacked. And about 10 months later, Kaspersky came out with this. How many people here are familiar or have read this WinNTI report? Anybody from Kaspersky? So you can get the details of what they found. We did feed the malware we found in 2012 to 12 different companies. We heard from 2 of them. One said it was not malware. Yeah, I had fun sending the report to them. And then also in 2014, the stuff I'm going to walk you through and show you today, we actually gave a copy of the infected VM, actually with the artifacts I'm going to be speaking about, to a large IR firm, and they came back and said the box was clean. So, pound fail there. And yay, I graduated above IR, is the moral of that story. Come on. So WinNTI 2014, so 2012 was the Kaspersky report, got in again in 2014, much more sophisticated than before. They updated their approach, much more complex, much more tricky. This is not your typical pwnage, but for sure, boy, did we catch them in the act. And I'm going to show you why and how. And pretty much, if it wasn't for this single item, it would have been very, very difficult. And I'm sharing with all of you so you can learn. This slide deck has been posted to SlideShare already, so we'll get that out of the way. It is available, and then Iron Geek obviously is recording this, so you'll get it on his website as well. So the history of WinNTI, it's been around for about 5 years. So this group, named by Kaspersky and the Bureau, as our communications with Bureau over this, now been doing this a while. There is an estimated $1 billion underground industry for the gaming. That's basically stealing fake gold, selling it online for real money, not to mention various other things like stealing accounts and whatnot. It's worth quite a bit of dough for those folks that are in this industry. And so they're highly motivated. That's really their motivation. And why do we know it's Chinese? Why? And I generally don't do attrition. Well, because Kaspersky and the Fed said it's the Chinese, so I'll believe them. And everything we saw pretty much concurs with that. And again, it's not quite state-sponsored, but a partner of mine made a good point in some of the trickiness we saw. And I would consider this your typical APT, an advanced attack. It was very much targeted to our company and an industry. So Sophos had reported 70% of all malware is unique to one company. 80% 10 or less. So the AV industry focuses on 20% of all malware, 360 million uniques last year. And they focus on a very small amount of that because that's what we see mostly in phishing and websites and whatnot. Obviously WordPress, Joomla type downloads, drive-bys. But what we saw each time they attacked, things changed. They're new. We actually received some malware where we saw compile dates from just 30 minutes ago. So these were very active participating actors. My buddy made an interesting point. Maybe this is state-sponsored in that we really can't tell what the bad actors over there are doing, and maybe this is how they test for the stuff they're actually going to use in the real world for state-sponsored attacks. I thought that was interesting. Not sure I would I would say that, but you know, it's possible. It really is. So here's a summary of 2012's stuff. Again, pretty typical malware, I think. A lot of DLL injection. They dropped DLLs in the WBM directory. What happens there is when WMI started, it loads the DLL automatically. Pretty much don't have to do anything else. They used the Explorer when someone logged into the box. Explorer.exe called DLL called linkinfo.dll, automatically loaded the malware when a user logged in. So they had multiple mechanisms to get into the box. Stored files in System32 and program data, pretty typical, looking like video drivers and stuff like that. Oddly enough, they did send us the Lenovo video driver that went around a couple years ago that had been hacked, and we were an all HP house, so that was kind of worthless, stuck out like a sore thumb. And they also use, how many people here have seen or read anything about the sysprep crypt-based compromise? Yeah, I know he knows about it. So if you're not monitoring for the execution of sysprep, I highly recommend you do. As a matter of fact, in one of the malwares I'm going to talk about later, I'm actually seeing this in commodity malware now, and it's actually been extended its use. I've only seen it used exactly like you see here, sysprep crypt-based DLL. So you just have to create a bogus, malicious crypt-based DLL, run sysprep space crypt-based, and boom, it loads. But I've seen some more sophisticated command lines on that, so I'm going to forward that to Microsoft because that to me is interesting. I think they need to fix that utility, is my guess. And they also had a boot up backdoor. So this thing was cool, real pain in the butt, because when you have RAID assemblies and big storage arrays, and you want to take the drive, you take the drive down like a workstation, you pull the workstation out, you put it in a test lab, and you can scan the disk. It's not that easy with servers, especially when they're in other countries. It's really hard. And so they had a little netcat kind of backdoor where when the system booted up, it read from disk, loaded and deleted itself, and then wrote down to disk after it was done. And the cool thing was we had a power outage in one of our office locations and one of our Exchange servers that had it, because we were trying to figure out exactly what the mechanism was, and it went away. And we're like, eh. So I pulled the power on a server here in town that I had, not here where I live in Austin, and poof, the malware disappeared. So interesting ninja tip, if you're dealing with an all-memory malware, just pull the power, shut your services down, the databases and whatnot, just kill it, because it can't finish doing the write down back to disk. And that was a very effective cleaning technique. Lots of new services. So this is very typical, just like you see in the retail POS attacks. Home Depot, Target saw the installation of 2 services. That alone should have alerted them to the detection of that kind of POS attack. And then they also put multiple infections on a machine. In some cases, some machines had a completely different infection, very small quantity. So the idea was if you caught the bulk, there would be these other variants of things elsewhere that they can get back in with. So you couldn't really focus at one thing. It was 3 or 4 things. So went into 2014. New stuff. Dude, this is cool. So what triggered it? What changed? They avoided the methods they used before. This was really cool. I mean, they really avoided what they'd done before. Probably because they booted everybody out so fast, they said, well, we can't do that again. Fortunately, we were doing really, really good logging, and we're ninjas after all, so we were able to detect it. So let's summary of the components here. They utilized plug X in regards to the O-Day, the patient 0 and the O-Days they were using. And they also had a litter of plug X around. It's very modular, it's an exploit kit, they can write things for it. And so we saw this kind of on the entry points that they would use. They also had DLL injection on SQL Server. Now that's unique because it's 5 directories deep. So when SQL Server would start all these processes, it loaded eventually cscapy.dll and then infected the SQL Server, which allowed them to then go in and run the .NET command series and XP command shell and do all kinds of ponage on the database. Fortunately, we caught them quickly so they didn't get any data out. They had a binary infector, so this thing's pretty cool. I'm going to talk about that a little bit. And a driver infector, which placed drivers. I'll talk about that as well. The cool thing here is they hid not only the scripts, but the payloads in the registry. So I'm going to walk through some of that. And the registry is like, huge, it's huge. It's a huge database. So how the heck do you find stuff in the registry when you can put anywhere? So we'll cover that as well. So patient 0 was pretty much a user. It was not an admin. So this is the cool thing. Usually the admins are the ones that got popped. In this case, the guy was not an admin. We verified that for sure. And he ran a bunch of Office at the time that we saw the hop over. So we think they took advantage of an O-Day. We did verify that some of the Office stuff had not been up-to-date patched. So fairly recent O-Day. And once that account got compromised, obviously that box got compromised with the O-Day, got admin access, they jumped immediately to domain controllers and used the backup credentials, the backup software credentials to do that. And once they had the backup credentials, boom, they could go pretty much anywhere in the environment. Pretty typical that they would do this. Always go to mail servers and DCs. Why is that? They have access to everything everywhere. So watch these things heavily, especially Exchange servers, because it has a great expel with mail. And from there, they spread all over the place on these servers. Same MO as 2012, so they have a very specific thing. They want to get a box, go to a domain controller, and bloom, let her out from there. So files dropped and gone in 60 seconds. They used, when the initial droppers came in and they spread them around, they used the public accessible directories. Why? They didn't have to worry about which user context they were in. These directories are available to everybody all the time. And they also littered different pieces and parts within those directories. And they deleted these infector files like this. I mean, these things were gone in a second or so. But they did leave a couple on disk. Again, the SQL Server file called cscapy was there, only on SQL Server boxes and only on some of them. qwave.dll is a normal sound driver or a sound support file for Windows workstations, but does not exist by default on Windows servers. And that popped up all of a sudden on these boxes that were infecting. They also picked on our management software. So if you ever wonder, I'll just exclude my management software out of my Splunk queries and stuff, yeah, you might want to rethink that. Now in this case, they just added some new files. They added drivers, and again, drivers don't log very well in Windows. They know we do really good logging, so they were trying to avoid that. But we also had BigFix, so we were watching for these file drops using BigFix and saw these driver files be added to directories they shouldn't be. And they were sys files, so again, they don't show loading in normal process execution. So the initial infectors were users public, lots of binaries being exploited from here. C.exe, we'll see that in a little bit. Infect.exe, didn't know exactly what that did until we finally got to the end. Infect sys, well, you know how the drivers got there. 64.dll, clearly looking for 64-bit systems. And then, again, 70% of malware is unique to one company. This file.exe was the name of our company, so clearly they were after us specifically, writing stuff for us specifically. And the perflog directory, they put some command binaries in there. Windows Web, they put INI files, and in the Windows temp directory, they put the VB script files. So you can see that they're littering different pieces of parts along the system, hoping we wouldn't catch them as easily. Modifying the permissions, of course. syswile64 was also used. qwave.dll was dropped there, syswile64.sys, and this axscripthost70.dll. Important to note, all the .sys drivers were the same file. Just FYI. So here's an example of the C.exe. For once, we actually compromised them. So we actually saw them utilize a password here. You can see the password Samsung on the box. And so we were able to actually then be able to replicate what they did in talking out. So they had a box that transferred malware to another box, and they used the password Samsung to propagate that. Kind of cool. So, and again, you can see the perflog directory being used here. And for once, we compromised them. It was awesome. Persistence. Well, this is the thing that started getting us kind of scratching our heads. So they wrote a file, or they called a file called WLX sys64.sys, and it was nowhere on the disk. So fortunately, we look at event code 7040, and we found through our watching this stuff, we do it pretty heavily. Services really don't change on servers. You should really monitor those. That they picked on the worst CPL support service, right? Who needs Windows error reporting support? And they basically pointed it to this file that didn't exist. We kind of scratched our head and went, this is one of those write back to disk when it shuts down. Well, we took a workstation and shut it down and read the disk, and it wasn't there. We're like, nope, that's not the case. So as you can see on the slide here, they modified what it looks, on the right it looks good, on the left is what they had put in its place. So fortunately, in the case of some of these, we had actually captured, before it encrypted the payload, the MZ or the hex dump of the binary, so we're able to literally pull that out of the registry, rewrite it, and create the DLL or driver to be able to compare it to the other systems and hashes. But you can see they're being kind of cryptic here. So how did it load if it was not on disk? Well, the persistence, worst CPL, this is great, Microsoft, worst CPL support service failed to start. So yay. When a service fails to start because it's not there, thank you, Microsoft, for looping over and over and over and over again. So this thing just kept starting, trying to start, but the file wasn't there. So we did see that, and we're like, well, at some point it's got to show up. And, well, we watched and tried to figure it out. So what ended up happening was, in the course of looking at the logs, this is your first hint, is command line logging is real powerful. You can see where we got some of the data from. So you can see them executing, in this case, pushing out the 64.dll. You can see here a big long list of scripts. This is what actually was in the registry. And then right here is what pointed us to the location the stuff occurred. This is the first big tip we got. And it pointed us to the software classes or clients keys. So command line logging was crucial in this attack in regards to detecting it. I would say we would have had a hell of a time detecting this attack without command line logging, because they went over under our radar with all the stuff we had alerting. The command line stuff gave us all the details we needed. It pointed us to the register key, it pointed us to the service, it pointed us to the locations, and now we just had to put the puzzle together. Now, as of last year, up until February 2012, February of this year, command line logging was only available on Windows 8.1 and 2012 R2. February, this auth O-Day thing that Microsoft had, they pulled that code from 8.1 along with a couple other service packs and pieces, and they enabled command line logging on Windows 7 and 2008 servers. So now you can do it all across the board. So very cool in regards to that. You do need to apply read KB 34375 to learn how to do that. And so we had seen them execute all these commands, right? So bottom line, cscript, command.exe, cackles, net, take own, push diatrib. This is not normal administrator behavior, not all at once, and not on 20, 30, 50 machines. And so you can see here the things that are called, again, pointing to the registry that they're pushing stuff for. Here's the starting of the service or stopping the service. And again, launching cscript to do some stuff, push D. Again, next to that, you can see software clients. And so we went looking, and then take on. So they're taking ownership because they don't want us to easily find these things. And again, it pointed us to the registry. And here's where the payload was. And again, look at the bottom. And this is the, in this case, it's hex. And so, no, this is the encrypted stuff. They called it hex, but this is the encrypted payload. So we had no way of going, well, what is this? So fortunately, there were 3 cases. This payload, when it got dropped, initially as an MZ in the registry, so literally started with MZ and all the code, and then they jumped it over to hex 45A, and then they encrypted it. So different states of the box being infected left these keys in various states. And when we replicated this in the lab, we immediately saw it go to hex, which gave us an idea what to look for. Just look in the registry for 45A. That can't happen too often. And we just kept playing and kept playing. And when we saw it go encrypted, we knew we had all the parts. So again, hex in some cases, as you can see here. Reg binary, right? They're calling the binary. It's encrypted. And when complete, it was encrypted. Other than that, sometimes it hung. Still, we didn't have enough to figure out how it did it. So this was new for 2014. We'd never seen them do this before. And I'll talk about how to detect this condition here in a second. They added 3 values to the keys. Again, the classes or clients key. They also used another key called binary with an acrobat. This is one of their, they only did it 3 places kind of backdoor. But same driver, same information. They just kind of put it somewhere totally different. Because once we knew what to look for, it was really easy to scan the environment. And they put these 3 keys in: put file, file, and read. So put file, well, here's the data that they in there. Again, not much use to us because you can't read it, right? So we really had to kind of reverse this and figure out what they did, or catch it in the act where it was in the clear, which is what we ended up doing. So you can see here, and this is the lab printout where we tried to infect the box in the lab, and you can see it here, it's in hex 45A. So definitely something to focus on. And after they got that stuff in the registry, got it all working the way they want, let's go back to infector.exe. What did it do? So we started playing with these executables that we'd captured, and I'll show you how to capture those in a second. So they had one for the DLLs, and they had one for the drivers. How they did this is they altered our management software. So whether they used caves, I never got around, I had left the company, never got around to it, whether they used caves to do that or they put some jump codes in there. The funny part was our software still worked perfectly well. That's really what was crazy. So our Bez client stuff worked fine, McAfee was still working fine, we didn't have any errors of loading or launching from these changes. But the hash did change and the certificate did break. And you can compare the strings of both files and clearly see they had been altered. So they had attempted a few other binaries and failed. It was custom code, probably why it failed. It didn't follow the typical standards of Microsoft APIs. And then we tried it on several files and were able to infect those as well. So this infector is kind of a pain in the butt. So it can infect pretty much any executable you have on the box. So again, back to the persistence, right? So now that we had this infect.exe and we were able to see where everything went, we had to basically put the puzzles and pieces together. And so again, back to that file that didn't exist in program files, common files. So now we know how it got there, okay? We know the infector altered McAfee or Bez or Altiris or whatever, and somehow in the process of that starting, it would write back to disk. But as soon as it loaded, it disappeared. So we got to see it load and then poof, gone. So it just had to run long enough to get the box infected. But again, we're better than that. We're ninjas. So what led us there? Well, first we did a malware discovery baseline. So this is my concept of taking the good hashes and comparing them to a suspect machines. We had a couple big files that were kind of typical to our Windows environment. So it was pretty easy, pretty quick to be able to run these through some of the boxes on the servers that had been infected. And we compared those to the suspects and used our master file repository, our big hash database of good stuff. And it showed us some single files and directories, namely McAfee, Altiris, BigFix, right? One altered hash on only like 20 servers. Well, we didn't update any agents, so I'm pretty sure that's something we should look at. And that's kind of how we got to looking at those files. And once we hashed those, we had BigFix, so we can easily just hash this file in this location and put it out on the screen and then sort it. We were able to find that these altered executable binaries had only been on the boxes that had these other behaviors we had seen. So now we knew that that binary had something to do with the infection. Excuse me. And so bam, we got you. So I loaded Procmon on this thing. I wanted to see that exactly it's starting up, and there is the Bez client helper actually writing to disk the WLX sys64 driver file. So now we actually could see the write to disk with Procmon. So now we knew the missing piece. We knew how the hell they got on disk. So we recreated in the lab. We knew we had everything and acted and looked just like we saw in the environment. And we had a high confidence remediation, right? You do not clean your boxes until you know you have every component, because if you miss something, they're going to alter their behavior and immediately nail you with something else that they've got waiting. And by the way, this didn't take us 210 days meantime to detection. This happened in Thanksgiving of last year. We had it cleaned up by Christmas. So way ahead of the norm of 210 days for sure. So finally, malware management allowed us to set up alerts and artifacts from malware analysis. So if you read, for example, perfect example, if Home Depot had read the Target iSight Partners report and looked for those artifacts on their system, they would not have been breached because they would have seen the new services were a component of the Black POS software and in theory could have alerted on the fact. Of course, our own experience, we've been dealing with these guys for over 3 years. And malware discovery with the hash comparisons allowed us to find the nuances of not doing the entire box, but cherry picking some of the infected ones and trying to find some odd hash variances, which work really, really well. And then malware analysis, of course, gave us the details we needed. So how can you guys detect this? This is a learning session, so here's the ninja tips. How we harvested the malware. Kind of silly, really. But again, some processes hung. As they infected stuff, it literally did not complete. And so all we have to do is look at basically process monitor or automate a script to dump those processes and find those hung systems. Why? The command line showed us the name of the executables they were using, so all we had to do is see if any of those are running in the environment. And command line logging is what pointed us to those executables. By the way, the executables they use, this happens a lot with malware, do scans for parentless binaries, meaning if I launch WinWord and WinWord has an executable in it that's bad, VB script writes out the disk, and you close WinWord, this thing does not have the parent ID. Better yet, if you have SVC host, commonly used in malware, has to be loaded by services. So if you go into Process Monitor or Process Explorer and you see services.exe, below that in the chain of the tree is going to be service host. If it's outside that, yeah, it's bad. So that's what I'm talking about. Look to see what the parent process ID is for these binaries. Almost 95% or more of the cases, these things must have a normal logical parent, except for the stuff that we all write because we generally do all kinds of funky things. Oddly enough, because of the command line logging, we wrote a script, really complicated script. Here it is. We did a robocopy to basically create a directory. We called it captured. I changed it to woohoo because that just sounded better. And we robocopied to woohoo, and when the boxes got infected, it copied everything they did in these directories, and we got copies of the binaries. So we started putting that running on all the servers across the environment to try to catch all the binaries on all the locations we'd seen on the existing servers, because they were going at it while we were going at it. Complicated script. Everybody here can definitely do that one. And this is great for doing it in your lab. If you're infecting in the lab, which we'll talk about in a second, the user app data space, you want to harvest the funkiness that happens with malware, crypto, and all that. I highly recommend you run loops through app data local low, and app data roaming. You'll catch all kinds of tidbits and artifacts that normally get dropped, executed, and deleted within a split second. So here's your top priority. This is your takeaway to go back to work and say, how do I start doing this so I can catch the stuff Mike's catching? Well, there's the KB, 343.75. I got the URL in there. Again, these are in SlideShare, so don't bother worrying about it now. These 10 items, your advanced audit policies, yes, use the Windows logging cheat sheet. If you're a Splunker, how many people here are Splunkers? Yeah, so go get the Windows Splunk logging cheat sheet, incorporate the two, and you're going to be way ahead. Yes, 4688s are the new process creations. They're noisy, but you can filter these out. At least collect them locally so you can use some sort of script or new tool, hint, to actually pull this information out if you're not. How many people here have log management solutions? Let's curiosity see. It can be anything. How SIM, that's not even half the room. That's like a third of the room maybe. So you're really going to like the latter part of this. Process creation login. You want to see that they're brute forcing stuff. So yes, you look for successes. Screw the failures. They know your creds. Audit file shares. So when they're hopping over, you want to definitely monitor your shares so you can see them connecting to them. You definitely want to start turning on some file registry auditing and file level auditing and registry level auditing on obvious keys. So once we saw them do this, we went and turned on registry auditing across all the classes keys and clients keys to see if they created some new keys. And then, of course, Windows Firewall. You can use this in Enterprise if you don't want to use the Windows Firewall. Put it in the any mode. Just don't set it in the OU, the root OU, and disable it. You're going to have to pull it out of there, put it in another OU, set it to the any or off mode, create another OU that turns it on in any. If you're investigating a machine, drag that machine in there, and you'll get it turned on. Highly recommend this because it gives you the process name and then the IPs they went to. So malware.exe went to 1.1.2.2. Really powerful. And of course, services. Not only new installed services like hit POS stuff, but also the changed existing services. And then PowerShell logging. Definitely can't say enough about this, but you're going to have to create a default profile and set your execution policy to restricted so that if they do execute PowerShell commands on you, which I see a lot in commodity malware right now, you're going to be able to catch that command line unless they do an execution policy bypass, which again is an indication that's what they're trying to do, and that makes a great Splunk alert and is in the logging cheat sheet. So here's a typical example. Remember those commands I showed at the very beginning of all the things they executed. So you build one of these, for you Splunkers, this is the Splunk alert right here, and you put all the different things in here. I mean, I've got Mimikatz and Netstat, and I just keep adding to this thing as I read malware reports. Oh, that command got used, sysprep is in here, and all the things they executed are in here. And I watch for this to generate a greater than 2. Why? An admin will go net use on a box and do a ping or something, and I sometimes get 2, maybe 3 commands. The hackers will generate at least 10 on a box. Sometimes they loop the infection multiple times. So this thing will go off like a trigger when there's something bad going on. This is like the best alert ever for Splunkers or whatever log management you might have. Size does matter. This is the tricky part that allowed us to really know where in the registry. Fortunately, the registry, being a database, has mostly keys of under 20K. So your ninja tip here is, in this case, Nearsoft makes a tool called RegScanner. This is where we started. And I'm able to look for keys of a certain size. So I knew how big the DLL or the driver was because I'd already harvested it. So I'm like, well, let's just go in the registry and start scanning servers for keys that are bigger than 100K. And there's like almost none. So even if they've broken up their malware, if you scan for keys bigger than 20K, you'd have to break up your malware an awful lot and risk it getting corrupted. But this is a great way to check for this kind of attack by looking for size of registry keys. David Longnecker in Austin, we had done some tweeting, and next thing I know, he writes RegLister, a Python script to actually go out and look for the size of registry keys, and watch Malware Archaeology or log-md.com for maybe more on that in the future. Enhanced logging. This is a great tip for incident responders or working in a lab. I turn on Sysmon anytime I have a funky box, but I have to give a huge shout out to Jason McCord, Digerati82. How many people here ever heard of the Windows logging service? So this is Sysmon on steroid. I highly recommend if you're looking for an alternative logging agent, whether it sends it to syslog, so you don't have to have fancy log management here. But the stuff it collects is awesome. Definitely take a look at that. But Sysmon's a sysinternals tool. The cool thing about Sysmon is it'll tell you from malware.exe, or let's use the WinWord example. WinWord.exe drops an executable, and in the process of the event ID 7, I believe it is, you'll see that executable being called, and then the fact that it's not signed. And so Sysmon can give you that kind of look. It also shows you when drivers load. That's another thing it gives you, so you can actually catch the .sys drivers. Malware discovery, real important. Once I labeled a system suspect, take my little batch file, SHA-1 deep64, and run that against the box and get a fairly short list of files to look at. Odd files will show up. So we know how many people here don't have a SIM. So what? You don't have a SIM? Wow. Oh, wait, intermission. All right, so Brian, come on up here. So Brian and I set out to solve a problem, and we'd like to share that to you today. So we're introducing a new tool called LogMD. It's free for everybody here. It is posted officially today, so you guys can go download this. Initially, I was trying to solve a problem of more quickly analyzing malware in a lab. So I was taking a lot of this data that collected through the WinNTI stuff, and I do a lot more with commodity malware, phishing, and whatnot. And I need to know the artifacts, the IPs and things, the location, the file names, the IPs, right? Those artifacts are important to me as a defender that I can put into my Splunk or my other security tools so it can search the entire environment for who has this condition. And for example, I get a phishing email. I can search Exchange by subject. I can take that, I can harvest that malware out because it's easy. It's an attachment. I can explode it in the lab, use LogMD, get the artifacts, go into Splunk, put the stuff in there, and bam, I know not only who received the email. I can send them an email and recall the message through PowerShell scripts. Send that to the IT guys. But I also have the IPs, and I know exactly who opened the stupid thing and go actually get their boxes remediated. And I have the data to give to the help desk guys. So it's great for investigating a suspect system. Clear the logs, reboot the box, and see what comes up. Right? Another use for it. Incident responders, I can totally see this. I've been referred to a couple IR gigs where I do the 20 questions with the people. I don't know if I have that turned on. So I now have something I can email these guys and say, do me a favor, run this thing. And it is referenced in regards to what it looks for is compared to the Center for Internet Security. We have a nice audit report that you can actually print out, copy into your assessment report, and now you have guidance on what to tell the client, what you should turn on and why. And it also compares it to the Windows logging cheat sheet. We go a little bit farther than CIS does, so I highly recommend you take a look at that. And it also assists you in the tweaking of the file and registry auditing. That's really cool. So when you start turning this stuff on and you play with it, you'll see some noisy keys or whatnot. Like, for example, if you were to go audit the services directory, you'll find TCP is lighting up your logs like crazy, so go turn it off there, and you can use LogMD to do that. And we call it the Log Malicious Discovery Tool. Log-md.com is the URL. And when you run the tool, it will fail until you configure everything here. So that's the cool thing. We are helping to push you or guide you, maybe it's pushing a rope, to actually enable this stuff. Guys, even if you're doing it, and gals, even if you're doing it locally, collect this information. Make sure your logs are big enough to actually carry about a week too, and you probably need to make your security log about a gig, FYI, once you turn all this stuff on. But when the tool finally runs, it will drop a report, CSV, real easy to consume. Use the Excel filtering option. We can demo this after the talks in the couch or HallCon and show you how this works real short. I got another laptop with some malware, so I'll show you how that works. And it's real straightforward. You know, LogMD-H, get the help file. LogMD-C will tell you all the configurations, and then you review it in the output. So again, auditing report, really cool. We also give you 3 whitelists as you're doing this on a box. So take a malware lab, for example. And this is really where it came in handy. I really wish I had this when I was doing the WinNTI work. Because once I started executing this stuff, well, what did it change, right? And I'd be able to run this tool. That's the big advantage here. Is we have 3 whitelists. Okay, I know I have that NVIDIA driver. I don't want to know that. Because I'm looking at command line, I can get very granular at what I throw out as a whitelist. Very, very cool. We can do about IP address, source IP, destination port, no source IP. Why? They're all over the place. It's going to be a waste of time to filter by that for the most part. And we also allow you to do file and registry auditing locations and throw those out. No, I don't need to see that directory. I'll clear that out later. The cool thing about that whitelist is it will become what you'll tweak your audit policies on the box or the registry for. So that's a really good way to help filter that stuff out. And then it generates the report. So here's an example of, I got a box, it was already infected, and I kind of wanted to see what it did. I rebooted, I cleared the logs, rebooted the box, and ran LogMD. And the yellow highlighted items are the ones you see at the bottom in text. I blew them up. And you can see that when this crypto event occurred, it read the original executable, VCW ixk.exe and dropped a new one, vcw per pir.exe. It then went ahead and deleted the original, and it piped out the command entrance to null, so you couldn't see any other data. And this is all captured on the command line, by the way. And then you also saw that it executed VSS admin delete shadows all quiet, which means, yeah, you're not getting volume shadow copy backups out of this crypto thing. So I knew at this point, reimage. 15 minutes, boom, done. Malicious Word doc. So this is an example I gave. So again, I executed the Word doc. I want to see what it does. I can see that it dropped these batch files and VBS files. They tried to get clever here because in the batch file, it made these variables for V and B and S and then assembled it on the command line, which is why you see all those funny quotes. Like, why? Because if I searched for .vbs in that command file, I wouldn't have seen anything. So that's what they were doing. That's the only obfuscation they were doing. But my little batch file caught all this. You can see here they're pinging China. Do I have network connection, or are you evaluating me in a lab? And then now we go ahead and execute the payloads. Here's where the directories were and the executables that were done with the payload. Again, do I still have network connectivity? Yes. And again, we continue. Windows firewall logs. So this is a great example. Now here's all the executables that launched. WinWord immediately went out to this suspect IP, and cscript is executing, going out to a suspect IP, pinging China, and the IPs associated with those. And here's all the executables that ran and what IPs they went as well. So now I have the data very quickly in regards to what I had to do. So I found out really quickly what processes executed, where it executed from, IPs to enter into log management to see who else opened the malware, the details I needed for remediation, and the details to improve my active defense. And I did this in, any idea? I wish. 15 minutes. That's how fast this can work for you if you get. Now, granted, I'm involved in the tool, so I can do it faster than anybody right now. That's Brian, but we're talking significant improvement to evaluating some typical commodity malware. I would have really loved to have had this and seen this activity, because I would have turned registry auditing and file auditing on all over the lab when I did the WinNTI stuff. I would have got a lot of details here. So again, in summary, malware is noisy. We can detect it, even this advanced attack. Completely changing their aspect of what they did in 2012 to a new method for 2014. For sure, logs hold all types of information. Quit underestimating logs. I play with a lot of malware tools. I play with tons of them. And I'm here to tell you, logging is the #1 tool for me. Absolutely, by far, hands down, nothing's even close. Big fix #2, and then maybe we can talk about the security vendors after that. It has become crucial. I worked for HP for 8 years, so I've seen a lot of stuff. We've got to start doing this. If we are going to get better in the industry for this stuff, do this, even if you collect it locally. And again, get the Windows logging cheat sheet. It talks about turning these things on and everything you need to do. Get LogMD, start playing with it. Come hit up Brian and I in the hallway or CouchCon downstairs, and we'll gladly demo it for you. And again, here's the resources. Malware Archaeology is my website, where we have a bunch of the Windows logging cheat sheets and various stuff. I do keep a very long list of the malware analysis reports, so you can actually start doing malware management on your own and go to these and look at the reports and start getting the artifacts for your environment. And again, you can find us here. Here's our tweets, both Bet Your Pwned and Hacker Hurricane. You can find us both at these locations. So let's take some questions and throw out some ding-dongs, and we got some time. Questions? Yeah, shoot. Yep. WMI was used as the persistence mechanism every time it started doing the management and loaded those bad DLLs. Yes. So you saw these sort of text blocks. Yep. No. Yeah, so the question is, have I ever seen this as being legitimate? The answer is no. There's only a handful of keys in the registry that are all large. I mean, they are almost all under 20K. There's a few, they're doing the icons and things, storage of kind of data. But as far as binaries, absolutely not. Nothing like that is normal in the Windows registry. So yes, definitely something to look for. Yes? Yeah, so the seats, everything, again, they're good, right? So they're not going to bother doing anything other. So the question was, what CNC communications do we see? Pretty much all 443. Of course, when they're hopping on boxes, you can see that port 445 with Samsung password was used. So they heavily used WMI attacks in regards to executing stuff remotely. There's no logging for WMI, but we saw all the behavior around that. So we were able to see what they did as they got on and off the box. But we do know WMI, port 445, within the environment. But then pretty much all 443 after that. Good question. And they use the Microsoft API crypto, by the way, so they didn't even bother using their own, built into the box. Anybody else? Questions? Yes, over here. Did we have the logs turned on patient 0? Oh, so people are dumb and they click on them. The user was of no help. He was really kind of a low-end user. So what exactly happened on that box, we don't know. We immediately, we know that everything started there because it was real obvious in regards to the connections going from the box. But what exactly he did, he would not tell us anything of any value, so we really don't know other than it started there. And it was a desktop, it was not a laptop. Question? Yes. That is a great question. So you notice I didn't mention that at all. I didn't mention anything about what sites they use to infect the environment with. The Chinese actors, the good APT, generally use US-based websites, and they use nothing on a blacklist. They'll actually jump from server hosting company, cheap Persia company A, B, and C, and jump from there. So in 2012, when they were using an AsiaPac server, we just cut off AsiaPac. They morphed and started using OpenDNS, and we cut that off. And then they morphed to use Google DNS. We cut that off. And then they moved to code.google.com, where they used a string on the code page to actually let the malware talk to it and change the direction where it's going. And so they totally went away from that this time. They're like, well, clearly they know we're coming from foreign countries, so we'll just use US servers. And they came from US servers that are used in the gaming environment, so we couldn't just say, well, block all these. They were used for VPN services. All they're doing is buying these host servers and rotating between IPs very quickly. So blacklisting that is almost forget about it. Great question. Anybody else? Yes, over here. So counterlogging, surprisingly no. We say they have good guys and bad guys just like we do. And this particular 2012 case, we saw very dumb, sloppy behavior, and we saw very good behavior. One of which is clear the logs. So they stopped doing that because it's such an easy trigger to look for, right? But surprisingly no. And now whether they will in the future, because now we're kicking them out, and we're talking 30 days. This was done. Really. And so, will they start doing that? Possibly. I know Carlos Perez and I have gone back and forth. I used to work with Carlos at HP, and he's working on stuff, and I expect some of that in his talk today, where he can kind of avoid that. You can, with PowerShell, as well as .NET commands, completely bypass writing to the log. So they'll start moving to that aspect. But they will execute things on disk, and that you really can't hide. We'll see. I mean, this is whack-a-mole, right? So we'll see what they do. People get. Brian, I'll have to the rest. Any other questions? Yes. Well, we happen to be a Splunk house, so that made life real easy. You can do Windows forwarding. I would recommend if you don't have anything, do Windows forwarding, because at least now you have one box that has everything, and you can use scripts for all that matter, right? You can use cloud solutions like Loggly or whatnot. But for the most part, you got to make them big enough so they collect, and then you can run scripts, automated scripts, or in theory, use LogMD, drop to a schedule a job. I'm sure it's very manual to have to do this. Schedule a job to create a report, and basically write it with the date and time of the machine, send it off somewhere, and you can run this thing every day. In theory, right? It doesn't take. It depends how much data. If you do like every day. In theory. Yeah, it's, clearly Splunk would be the enterprise solution, or some sort of ArcSight or something to really do this as far as getting it off the box. And not even close. Yes? Yeah, so, well, it's China. What's the chances of us really doing anything? So the question here was, doesn't it really frustrate you that we do all this work, but really, what happens next? So, again, this year, this particular 2014 stuff, we gave the box to an IR firm, hoping to get that kind of report. They came back and said nothing was on it, and it was all that stuff I just shared with you. So, yay. But we give all the explicit details to the Bureau and work with them. I do know that this data that we provided them, being we were so far ahead of it last time, this time they went out of their way to declassify it very quickly. I think within 3 months they were giving it to other gaming companies, reporting to them what we had seen and where to look and how to find it. So from that perspective, that's really up to them. I'm not going to get involved with that. If I need to do a full reversing of malware and stuff, and I really need to do it, I'll reach out to the Malware Must Die guys, or I'll throw it over the fence to a Mandiant or a Dell SecureWorks or anybody else who wants to reverse these stuff to get really, really good at it. But as a defender, I don't care. I need to know what it's doing in my environment, theoretically, basically, and then I need to get rid of it. That's really my goal as an active defender. And the reversing stuff is definitely an after the fact. Get my report done, we got everything, yep, good. All right, now let's spend the time. Good question. All right, yes. 4 more minutes. Yeah, we know from the Bureau telling us specifically that in the gaming industry, a lot of the security people would get compromised because they would go after you for jobs and things like that. And the emails we got, for CEO got one, for example, it was beautiful. Uncompromised server to a page that they had just added to the server. I mean, everything looked totally normal. But he had just talked to the guy, which is why he reported it to us. So very close for him to click on it. And we did in the lab and found it was malware. So from that aspect, the phishing is, in the gaming industry, EA just announced a layoff because Star Wars is a big flop. And all of a sudden the resumes go out, so HR gets nailed with that. They're very in tune with what's going on in the environment. They know who we are from LinkedIn, they buy the service, they can see when you join a company, you added a bunch of people from that company. So in my case, I never add people from where I work currently, because I don't want that thing to show up in LinkedIn so they can say, he probably works for company B. I just say, I'm not telling you hackers, and I tell everybody who says, hey, can I join your LinkedIn? Nope, not till after I leave the company. So I avoid that to try to get rid of some of that noise. I get invited to a lot of cons in countries I'm never going to. All right, 3 minutes. Anybody else? I got lots of ding-dongs to hand out. Hit us up in the hallways, you'll still get ding-dongs. I'm not taking these back to Austin. Don't be a ding-dong. All right, we got one here. Oh, great question. Give him 2 ding-dongs. So oddly enough, in 2014, none of it was signed. And what they did when they used the infector, it broke all the signatures. So they just ignored the whole signature thing all the time. In 2012 and 13, though, they did use signed files pretty extensively. So we found Tencent, we found the Lenovo webcam driver, and they use these as launchers. So anybody familiar how Bit9 works? If you can package something up and trust that installer, everything below that installer is automatically trusted. And so they tried to use that logic against us. We didn't have the Bit9 stuff. We were in demo mode when it first occurred, which is probably why they did that. So they used an executable called form.exe, which was signed. They used an Intel driver, which was signed. A lot of these had expired, not revoked. So some of them are very valid, like Tencent, they use that for the QQ chat. And so they just figure out, maybe, again, have anybody ever analyzed malware and analyzed drivers that you get from Dell or HP? They look the same. These are probably the after hours work of driver writers. And so they look very similar in that aspect. Same sloppy habits, same kind of use of API calls and stuff. It's just garbage. I hate seeing drivers going, ugh, now I got to go install a printer driver and to exclude that from my master list. But for the most part, no signing in this go around. Really, really interesting. But last time, and when they did that once a month, once every other month thing, they very much used signed files that are either expired or current from somebody they compromised. Good question. All right. Yes. Yeah, so did they use comments? Comments, no, but stupidly PDB files. I mean, some of these were so obvious. It's clear that these actors in WinNTI are using some exploit kit, commodity malware, because you can tell it's not written by them. We saw Russian language references in there and whatnot. But the long descriptive location of what the stupid PDB file, project file is in the .NET compiling, surprising that that would be left in there. Because right, if you look at a Windows executable, it's like explorer.pdp. It's not some big long path and drive letter. But yes, that actually stuck out quite a bit when we did the strings of the malware. So good question. Throw them a ding dong. Anybody else? Okay, hit us up in SofaCon and BarCon, and all's good. We're done.